Crash Law 24 sponsors GBNews Traffic and Travel Report.
Good morning. This is the latest AI travel news from GBNews.com. A broken down vehicle is causing delays on the M8 westbound at the slip road from Calder Junction. Roadworks on the A470 northbound at Taffs Well have led to a full closure with diversions in place. On the A50 eastbound between the junction with the A515 at Sudbury West and Sudbury, an accident has resulted in lane closures. The A21 northbound between the A225 and A25 in Kent has road management in effect, causing a 15-minute delay. And on the trains, disruptions are reported between Wakefield Westgate and Sheffield, and between Wakefield Westgate and Doncaster. For more travel news, go to gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GBNews Traffic and Travel Report.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Should we be paying more for the BBC, do you think?
Yes, in the short term. It's for a cost of a cappuccino a week. You don't only get all the television channels, you get all the radio channels, local news, you get the websites, you get World Service, a significant amount of that. You've got a vast range of things. It's not just a television licence. And the BBC licence fee, in real terms, has gone down about 40% in 15 years. What I think we need is two things. One is an immediate increase, significant increase, so we stabilise the situation.
Go on, how much, Roger? What's the fee?
Hold on.
Well, tell me how much.
Then, secondly, hold on, we need to have a proper debate publicly about whether we want public service broadcasting, how we want to deliver it, and how we want to pay for it. The BBC has cut as much as it can. We should now have a public debate about what we want.
OK. All right, the BBC's cut as much as it can. I mean, grief. I would love to try to see the BBC try to operate on the kind of budget.
I thought you were chairman, objective chairman here. It was a head-to-head with this lady, and you were going to be an objective chairman.
Yeah, well, you decided not to answer any of my questions. But anyway, June, I'll put this one to you. Well, what do you think about the money?
Yes.
June, what do you think about the money being paid for the BBC? Should we pay more?
In 2020, you lost 80, let's have a look, 80,000. And then by 2023 to 24, that went up to 500,000 licence fees not being paid. That's because they don't want the product. A lot of the reason is the bias side of the news, which is why people watch GB News. The programme making, I can understand the creative part of it, but what you've got to look at from the public's point of view is they pay their licence whether they're using all those facilities or not.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good morning, it's Britain's Newsroom with Andrew Pearce and Beverly Turner, and we are going straight to join the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, who is in Westminster. Chancellor, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Big day, but bad day today because the economy shrank last month, 0.3%.
So those were data from April. Monthly GDP is notoriously volatile. So while the numbers are disappointing, perhaps not that surprising. And if you dig into the numbers, it shows that trade and production are weak. And I think that reflects the tariffs that came in April. But of course, since then, we've had 3 trade deals with the United States, with India, and with the EU. So obviously disappointing numbers, but they are volatile, and it was a particularly challenging month with so much uncertainty.
Yeah, it was challenging, Chancellor, not least because you raised national insurance, and that kicked in for employers in April, the same month. You didn't mention that.
No, but that was known. But what wasn't known was the tariffs. But since then, we have secured those trade deals. And we did have to increase taxes as a government last year at the budget because there was a black hole in the public finances when we entered office last July. We needed to get a grip of the public finances and also have the money to properly fund our public services. And that's why yesterday in the spending review, I was able able to put more money into defence, to keep our country safe, put more money into our health service to reduce those NHS waiting lists, and also put money into projects to grow the economy in all parts of Britain, with transport better linking our towns and our cities, investment in affordable housing, and also investment in things like nuclear energy to secure our energies in this country.
But quite simply, where people need you to put money is back in their own pockets at the end of the month. British people are losing their jobs in record numbers. We saw a reduction in the number of people on a pay-as-you-earn system last month go down by record numbers, more than since the pandemic. There is genuine fear out there that people can't afford to live and that businesses, small businesses, are closing at a rapid rate. What reassurance can you give people that they're going to feel that they can afford to meet even basic costs?
Well, look, I recognise that things are still tough for many people, but in the first 10 months of this Labour government, wages have increased by more than they did in the first 10 years of the previous Conservative government. That's real wages after inflation. But I do recognise that we need to do more to make working people better off. It's why, for example, yesterday we expanded the Warm Homes Plan to insulate more people's homes, to take money off their fuel bills every single year. It is why we are providing free school meals for children whose parents are on universal credit. It's why we are supporting childcare so that more parents can go out to work. But crucially, it's why it was so important to return stability to the economy, which has enabled the Bank of England to cut interest rates 4 times in the last year. And for families with a mortgage or paying rent, that is good news for them after the huge increases in interest rates and in inflation that we saw under the previous government.
Are we still chance of going to be able to afford an additional 13,000 police officers made up of specials and part-time police officers after your spending review, because the police didn't do as well, perhaps, as the NHS?
Well, police spending power is going to increase by 2.3% a year over the next 3 years of the spending review. That's an increase above inflation. That is the average increase that we put into public services yesterday. The NHS did get 3%, but I think most of your viewers will accept when NHS waiting lists are still at 7.5 million, that's where the Tories took them, that we need to get people the operations, the doctor's appointments, the dentist appointments that they need. But police funding is going up significantly by more than inflation and more than the average they've been receiving under the previous government. So that is a good settlement, but I'm not able to say yes to every request. And you made the point, and rightly so, about people having more money in their pockets. And I set the envelope for public spending at the budget last year. I said that public services now had to live within their means. At the spending review yesterday, I didn't spend a penny more or a penny less than the amount that I set out in the budget and at the spring statement. That is important because you have to get the balance right between tax, spending and borrowing. And if you said yes to every request for more money, you'd end up in the same position that Liz Truss ended up in, which is crashing the economy, sending mortgage rates spiralling and causing the cost of living crisis that's done so much damage. So I think it's a fair settlement for the police, and it is a real terms increase in their funding.
OK, thank you so much. I don't know whether you were watching GB News last night, Chancellor, but Patrick Christys has done a brilliant job of tracking down migrant smuggling gangs. Can you guarantee that you will work with the evidence that GB News has acquired to smash the gangs? Because, frankly, we are making it look quite easy at this end.
Well, I will make sure that the Home Office watch that, because we do need to crack down on those gangs. It's why yesterday we announced £250 million for the Border Security Command to do just that, because we can't just carry on like we have been these last few years. We do need to stop people crossing the channel. Then we need to deport people if they're here illegally, and that's why I was able to reaffirm that we would end the use of asylum asylum hotels during this Parliament. It's right that we get people out of those hotels, and if people have got no right to be here, they should be on the plane back home, because it's not right that British taxpayers are picking up the bill for those hotel stays.
All right, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, I know you've got a busy schedule. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Chancellor of the Exchequer, first time on this programme. Sadly, there's many more questions we wanted to ask her. Particularly, I wanted to ask her, where is she going to put the migrants who are apparently not going to be in our hotels in 2029, which she says will be by the end of the Parliament? Let me just tell you, 2029, there'll have been a general election by then. There'll be a different government in power.
Look,
or not. They may be re-elected.
Yeah. If you didn't see Patrick Christie's last night, do check it out, because Patrick and his team have done the most remarkable work on contacting, finding, tracking a smuggler, a person smuggler. And so if we can make it look that easy, there is no reason why the government... We just heard it from Rachel Reeves. She's going to help him out. She's going to work with us. Brilliant.
Well, let's make sure we send the film. So, couldn't be better timing. Look who's in the studio with us. John Mappin, owner of Camelot Castle Hotel. John, when you came on this programme last time, the reaction, you went viral. It was the biggest reaction we've had to an interview on this programme. I think one of the biggest reactions on GB News, because you made clear you've been offered vast inducements by the government to take migrants in your fabulous hotel, which we will put some images up of, and you said no.
Well, to be honest with you, Andrew, we were extremely humbled by the response. And as you say, I think that clip was viewed roughly 40 million times.
Yes,
I was called from America. Tucker Carlson got involved.
Wow.
You know, Charlie Kirk got involved, and all sorts of... I think it struck a chord. I think, frankly, the idea of illegal migrants being put up in four-post beds at Camelot Castle in sort of more than adequate environment.
Well, it's a stunningly beautiful hotel.
We really like it, and the environment's beautiful, but I think...
And people, if you're listening on the radio, we're just seeing images of the hotel. Just describe where you are, John.
Well, it sits at the birthplace of King Arthur, the mythological birthplace of King Arthur, and it's got a 270-degree ocean view.
So that's
lovely.
in Cornwall?
It's in Cornwall, yeah, it's in Cornwall.
Yeah.
And it's a historic heritage site. In fact, I think I'm correct in saying it's the second most visited English heritage site other than Stonehenge.
Right.
So we get about 800,000 visitors a year.
Yeah.
And the idea of the sort of pressures that placing 300 to probably 400 migrants in a building, I think they'd have stacked them in
And
there.
they offered you a £1 million contract. A lot of people would have jumped at the money.
You say that, Andrew, but actually, I think most people in England would have turned it down.
I hope you're right.
There are a few people. The British people are very fair, and on average, I think we all, in the majority, love our country. And I think everybody can see what is going on and the pressure cooker that is being created by this government and by the previous government. And look at what's happening in Ballymena. I mean, it's very serious.
Yeah, we're going to be going to Ballymena this morning, where Dougie Beattie is doing the most remarkable job on the tensions there. Would you, could you envisage, John, had you opened your doors to asylum seekers, economic migrants, these people, similar tensions down in Cornwall? It's a different landscape, I understand, but what would the tensions have been within the village had you done that?
I think it would have destroyed the village. I think for decades. And, you know, this is, you know, Rachel Reeves is saying that she's going to clear out these migrant hotels. Number one, as you said, where are these people going to go? And I have a sneaky feeling that they're going to be putting them into other accommodation. And I actually had a call from Switzerland the other day from a very major real estate owner. He owns property in the UK. And he was offered a 25% uplift on his rental property. And he was offered assistance to kick out the existing English tenants and replace those English tenants with illegal migrants. Now, I have a strong suspicion that that is what the government has in mind. And what this is doing is putting pressure on rentals, younger families that are trying to get into properties. It's a very, very serious situation. This country is a pressure cooker. And to answer your question, I don't think the local Cornish people would have liked it at all. They tend to think very much in the same way as any rational, sane human being would think. If you have an extra 300 people coming into a village of 1,500 people, all of whom, let's be honest, are lawbreakers.
Yeah, because they arrived illegally.
They have arrived illegally. That is a criminal act. And my point is this. If any government was actually serious about handling illegal immigration, this entire problem could be handled within a month.
Well, I think it's really important that we're clear that we're not saying that people that would arrive would then go on to break the law inevitably. I think we need to be really clear about that. But
they've
what
broken
you're
the law
saying
to get
is
here.
They've broken the law to get here without going through the normal channels. But what else is lost, John? What is at stake here? Because when we see politicians accommodating, quite literally accommodating hundreds of, tens of thousands of people in this way at great expense to the taxpayer, what is motivating them to do that when it is quite clear to us that there is a cost?
Well, I think there's an agenda, and I think a group of people have worked out how they can personally profit from this, and it's a very tiny number of people. They have worked out how they can profit, and these individuals don't give a damn about ordinary people out there in Britain.
Because it will never affect their high street where they live.
Well, they don't even live in England, most of these people.
Yeah.
These people are living in enclaves. They live they're not, well, they are, on the whole, effectively gated communities. If they're not gated physically, they're gated by the fact that you and I couldn't afford to live there.
Yeah.
And, you know, the truth of the matter is that it is a very tiny number of people that are profiting from what I see as the evil cultural destruction of this country. And I want to make it very clear. I don't dislike the culture of any foreigner. I appreciate foreign cultures, but I like my own culture. And I don't want to see...
And do you see, perhaps not so much in Cornwall, in other parts of Britain, that the country is changing?
It absolutely is.
And
even now it's changing in Cornwall. A couple of hotel owners did take the government shilling in Newquay, and which was a very, very popular, very popular holiday town. The landscape there has completely changed. It is no longer the safe, cheerful holiday town that it was. My own mother lives in Eastbourne. I don't think you get more of a bellwether conservative. She's got migrant hotels up and down. She bought into Eastbourne so that she could, in her old age, walk up and down the front, as many elderly people do. She no longer feels safe doing that without somebody else. Well, she's 86 years old, and she's scared. And she's living in fear of what has happened to the society. And when you go to Eastbourne, it's a disgrace, because all the money that used to be spent on the beautiful carpet gardens that you used to have down in Eastbourne Eastbourne was known. I think they've got 5 gardeners for the whole of Eastbourne now.
Because the council have to spend the money.
Because the council has taken money from Peter to pay Paul. And, you know, my view is that charity begins at home. We are a country of common sense. We are a very fair and a very charitable people. And I genuinely don't think I am the exception. To me, it was an absolute no-brainer. I'm sure, Andrew, you wouldn't have taken the money. I know, Beverly, you wouldn't have taken the money.
Certainly not.
The truth of the matter is, and I think the majority of your viewers would feel exactly the same way.
You must worry about your mum.
I do. I'm very worried about her because, you know, Eastbourne's quite a long way away from Cornwall. And
you didn't have to worry before?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't have to worry about her. And thank you for raising that. It's an emotional point for me, actually. Because, you know, I love my mum, and she's been a good mum. And why shouldn't she have the right, as my grandmother did, who also happened to live in Eastbourne. There's a lot of grandmothers in Eastbourne. But they walk up and down the front, and they go and get an ice cream, and they will have a cup of coffee with their friends.
They see their mates.
Well, why should they be experiencing this cultural degradation?
Yeah. And there are a lot of people, actually, who feel like that about their parents, because often the elderly parents don't want to leave the house they've grown up in, and those are the areas which have changed culturally beyond all recognition. When the pub has closed, when the cafes have closed down, when there is no sense of community, it affects every generation.
Well,
John, great to see you.
You are
John
a great
Macklin
man.
there
Just
from
remind
Camelot
people of John's
Castle.
Hotel. If you haven't looked at it, find it on the internet. It's called Camelot Castle in Tintagel.
Yeah.
Magnificent. And he's a magnificent man.
Breaking news, an Air India flight to Birmingham has crashed in Ahmedabad with 133 people on board. We will bring you that as we get it. It was a Birmingham-bound Air India flight which has crashed in Ahmedabad. It had 133 people on board. We will bring you any information as we get it.
Up next, we're crossing to Northern Ireland to get the latest on those disorders, which I'm afraid are escalating, and that is all to do with migration too. A leisure centre in Larne was set on fire last night. But to lighten the mood, let's give you some holiday sun.
Can't wait to get in that sea.
Lovely and warm.
Just like the feeling of having great travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello and welcome to your holiday sun forecasts from the Met Office. Most places sunny across the Mediterranean, particularly hot in Italy, breezy for parts of Greece as well as the Canaries, but no more than usual. And for Iberia, well, chance of some showers clearing northern Spain, but otherwise it's hot sunshine, temperatures well above average throughout much of Italy, whilst a few showers are likely over Greece during the next few days, but most places stay sunny this weekend.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
No matter the state it's in, this is our nation. Join me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, for a genuine, honest discussion on where we have been, where we are going, and where we are with the people who set the direction. That's State of the Nation every Monday and Tuesday at 8 o'clock, only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
French authorities first seized the Lady T, and that's an Eastbourne-based fishing vessel. And next, they fined its skipper, Philip Edwards, €30,000 to release his boat. Now, the Lady T, operating legally under UK jurisdiction, was intercepted by a French patrol ship near the Somme Bay. Now, the incident has sparked massive outrage among British fishermen and is renewing calls for the government to stand firm against French overreach in national waters. Well, I'm delighted to say I'm now joining with Charlotte Edwards, who's the husband. Philip is the skipper of the Lady T and is out fishing right now. Charlotte, welcome to the show. I've got to say, here at GB News, we are hugely supportive and appreciative of British fishermen and fisherwomen. Do a fantastic job. So if you're nervous about the interview, please don't be. I want to ask you how on earth this happened. I mean, there's been a lot of talk, for example, that the Lady T didn't have the correct paperwork, it was fishing illegally, and the French decided to pounce. What's the reality?
The paperwork just slipped through. It was an admin error. The other two boats had the permits, and unfortunately, his didn't at the time. He wasn't in as far in as they said he was. He was about 800 metres in their water. He wasn't near the 12-mile.
He was intercepted by the Pluvier. That's a French Navy ship. No, by the way, the sort of French Navy ships that just seem to give an escort to illegal dinghies coming into British waters, suddenly pouncing into action. The only boat they've managed to stop seems to be the Lady T.
GB News, the People's Channel.
You want to know what's really going on in the corridors of power? Labour don't know what to do with you half the time, and that makes you quite lethal in the chamber. Get behind the headlines with Chopper's political podcast. Join me, Christopher Hope, as I sit down with the great and the good of British politics. We'll see where this ruling takes us. These are the stories shaping our nation. Chopper's political podcast, available now on all platforms. Listen in and stay ahead.
I'm Nana Akua. This
is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, to recap that breaking news, an Air India flight destined to London has crashed in Ahmedabad in India, with reports say as many as 240 people on board. We don't know anything about fatalities, but witnesses say pools of black smoke have been spotted at the site, as you'd imagine. We're going to bring you the latest when we get it, but just to confirm, an Air India flight to London, and it's crashed in a place called Ahmedabad, with up to 242 people on board, which is very bleak news indeed.
According to residents nearby in an area called Maganinagar, 3 loud explosions were heard, followed by smoke. We don't yet know, obviously, the cause of the incident, and we don't know the extent of the damage to the aircraft yet to be confirmed. All roads leading to the airport have currently been closed after the incident, and we're going to be looking for updates from both Air India and the Directorate General of Civil Aviation. So we will bring you that as we get it. Initially, we had thought it was a plane that was destined for the Midlands here, but now it's been clarified it was actually a plane. It was takeoff Thursday evening, local time, in India, from the international airport in Ahmedabad. Routine operations of the tarmac. There was an immediate emergency response. They're saying more than 5 firefighting vehicles were sent immediately to the site. Officials confirmed that fire tenders were swiftly mobilised following the alert, and they are currently engaged in response and assessment operations.
And of course, this is going to be deeply concerning for people here if they had relatives on board. It was destined for London. No suggestion it was a tourist plane, and it crashed in Ahmedabad. We're going to bring the latest when we get it, but it was an Air India flight, up to 240 people on board. Emergency services out, obviously, with pools of black smoke. 3 explosions, apparently, according to eyewitnesses, were heard. So we will keep you up to date on that. And we will also be going to Northern Ireland to get the latest on those disturbances which have escalated across Northern Ireland. We're going to go to the weather now.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, a very good morning to you. Welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's a humid day to come with heavy showery rain in places, but still some very warm sunshine breaking through away from the showers. In fact, a few rumbles of thunder are possible as heavy rain moves into western and southern parts of the UK during the morning. This is going to be on and off. It's going to be hit and miss. Drier towards the east and the north. Some sunshine to start the day, but it's also breezy, particularly in the west, with some strong gusts around western coast and hills. And the heavy rain will continue on and off in places well into the afternoon. But away from the rain, temperatures still reaching 27 or 28 Celsius, particularly towards the southeast. So a humid feel, and that humidity, as it rises overnight, will lead to a muggy night. But we end the afternoon and go into the evening with some drier weather arriving into southern and southeastern England, some sunshine. The focus for heavy rain moves into Irish Sea coast, northwest England, North Wales. Northern Ireland sees the rain clearing by this stage, but it's pushing into parts of central and western Scotland. Meanwhile, northeast Scotland, a pleasant end to the day with, keen breeze, but it's going to feel warm as the sun slowly goes down later in the evening. Those spells of rain, though, do reach the northeast of Scotland during the hours of darkness as low pressure slowly peels away. And then still some showers to come for northern and western parts of the UK overnight. A lot of cloud in the west, some low cloud in places. Clear skies to the east, but whether you've got the clear skies or the cloud, it's going to feel muggy. Temperatures not dropping below the mid-teens, so perhaps an uncomfortable night for sleeping. Then some decent sunny spells in the east first thing. The cloud in the west will break up, but as the day progresses and as temperatures rise, likely to be the hottest day of this spell, some showers or thunderstorms could break out, particularly Northern Ireland, Scotland and Northern England. Temperatures reaching 29 Celsius in London, but further thunderstorms are likely to arrive from the south overnight.
A positive outlook through the night will power through to a bright day ahead. Boxed Home Battery Storage, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Good morning. This is the latest AI travel news from GBNews.com. Due to ongoing roadworks, the eastbound M8 exit to the A804 is closed, leading to diversions and extended travel times for commuters. In Taffs Well, maintenance work on the northbound A470 is causing diversions. Lane closures on the M4 eastbound between junctions 4 and 3, as well as on the M23 southbound between junctions 8 and 9, are resulting in significant delays. On the railways, disruptions affect cross-country services between Wakefield, Westgate and Sheffield, and Great Western Railway is experiencing delays on routes between Exeter St David's and Okehampton. For more travel news, go to gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
£54,321 in totally tax-free cash could make your year the best yet. How would you react if you got that winning call?
Oh my God, I'm going to cry. Oh my God. Thank you.
You weren't expecting to get that call today, were you?
No, I wasn't.
For a chance to win £54,321 cash, text cash to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB14 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 1st of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
He can say whatever he wants.
A straight-talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
9 a.m. on Thursday, the 12th of June, live across the United Kingdom. This is Britain's Newsroom with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So, breaking news, an Air India plane bound for Britain carrying up to 242 passengers has crashed in India. We'll have the latest as we get it on this developing story.
Another breaking news this morning, the economy shrank by 0.3% in April. This comes one day after the Chancellor's spending review, where Rachel Reeves made this unexpected announcement.
We will be ending the costly use of hotels to house asylum seekers in this Parliament.
She favoured the NHS and social housing over police and defence spending as critics warn tax rises are now inevitable. The Tory Shadow Chancellor Sir Mel Stride, I think, gave his verdict.
The Right Honourable Lady has no grip. She has no clue. The markets and the public see a Chancellor completely out of her depth.
Northern Ireland riots. Violence has raged on for a third night in Ballymena as the disorder spread to other towns, with a leisure centre being set on fire in Larne last night.
Sovereignty surrender. Again, Sir Keir Starmer accused of selling out Gibraltar in a new post-Brexit trade deal. The Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, however, is pleased with the agreement.
Well, I'm delighted that today we have reached a historic solution.
And you fancy a pint? We're going to be joined by Nigel Farage, MP, at the Talbot pub in Blackpool. It is a pub that has branded itself. It's gone from Tory to Reform. We will be live there. I'm picking up your vibration. She's giving me
excitations. The Beach Boys legend, and he really was a legend in more ways than one. Brian Wilson has died at the age of 82. Tributes have poured in from some of the greatest musicians from all around the world.
Busy news day.
I saw him play in Sydney about 15 years ago. It took about 20 years. It was one of the most extraordinary concerts of my life.
Oh, really?
Amazing. He was away with the fairies for a lot of it, but it was great.
It's a very interesting breaking news morning today.
Yeah.
That plane crash, we've just heard about it in the last 20 minutes or so. We're going to be bringing you as much information on that as we can. It was an Air India plane that was heading to Gatwick. It was the flight A1171. It was involved in the incident this morning, British time. Of course, that was in the evening in India. And at the moment, we are ascertaining all the details. We're going to share you further details as we get them.
There was 242 people on board, whether that includes the crew or not too, but the details are very sketchy. Reports of up to 3 explosions were heard at the scene before the crash. And it was destined to Gatwick. We don't have any information at this stage on fatalities. It was a Boeing 787.
Yeah, we are just... The news about this is just coming in. Obviously, this will be of particular concern to our audience. It was a plane headed to London Gatwick Airport. There will be family members desperately now trying to ascertain information. It looks like it's landed fairly closely to the airport that it was taking off from. There will, of course, have been many Brits on board this aeroplane.
And now Reuters cites local TV channels. More than 100 people, they say, were on board the flight, but could be up to 240. That's why it's very sketchy at the moment. Video circulated on social media shows massive plumes of smoke rising into the sky near the airport in the city, which is in the west of India. So this is pretty alarming for people.
I'm just having a look where Ahmedabad. It's in western India.
Yeah.
It's the largest city in the state of Gujarat, and presumably, very likely, British people on this aeroplane, as we've been saying. It was headed for Gatwick. We will bring you any information. It is the most populous city in the Indian state of Gujarat in India. Air India flight. Capacity to carry 240 people. Whether it was at full capacity, we don't yet know.
I was just checking. The Gujarati population in Britain is estimated around 635,000, which makes it a significant portion of the Indian diaspora in the country. Let's talk to the former airline pilot and author of Confessions in an Airline Pilot, Why Planes Crash, Terry Tozer, who joins us now. Terry, we're putting you on the spot here. Unusual for planes to crash, but what do you make of what you've heard so far? We're struggling with volume here.
I think you might, Terry, I don't know whether you can still hear us. We can't hear you. It might be that your laptop...
We'll come back to it.
It might be that your computer is on mute. We will try.
No, we've got him back. We've got him back.
Got you.
Terry, try again.
OK. Yeah, I mean, it would be very unusual for such a modern aircraft to have a major technical failure. It's very hard to know what the reasons for this would be at this point. All public transport aircraft are capable of sustaining a major engine failure at the most critical point of takeoff and still continuing safely, clearing all the obstacles. So it is very unusual for something like this to happen to a major transport aircraft.
Because this is a big plane, Terry, isn't it?
Yeah.
And most plane crashes, if you think that perhaps up to 100 a year, involve normally, if I'm right, small, light aircraft.
No, I don't think you could. Well, I mean, we're talking about two completely different eras of aviation. I mean, or spheres of aviation. I mean, you've got private aviation in small light aircraft and public transport aircraft, which are heavily regulated or should be. And, you know, I have written about this in my book because I'm afraid not everywhere regulates as well as everywhere else. You know, it's far too early to speculate about what might have caused this.
Yeah.
As I say, the aircraft should have been able to take a fairly substantial failure and continue the takeoff safely. So it is a puzzle why something so catastrophic should happen.
And it, no doubt, I think will prove to be catastrophic because it looks like the plane has come down in a populated area. It didn't come down on the tarmac of the airport. It looks like it has fallen into an area of Gujarat, as we say, that's a very densely populated area. It took off at 1:31 p.m. on Thursday, was en route from the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport in Ahmedabad, going to Gatwick Airport, and it's crashed near an area called Meganinagar, approximately 15 kilometres from the airport. So if it's crashed 15 kilometres from the airport, Terry, how long might that have been in the air, and how high would it have achieved at that period of time?
Well, it's hard to say. It would have probably climbed to 1,000 feet or more. Like I say, it's very hard to understand why a modern public transport aircraft should literally fall out of the sky in that fashion. I mean, there could be multiple reasons, but at the moment, it's pure speculation. You would normally expect, obviously you have to consider the possibility of external interference, although that is very, very rare. We really won't know until there's a bit more information.
Yeah. There's footage coming in here now of, frankly, chaotic scenes. We will bring them to you as soon as we can have them verified, because, of course, this number of casualties, Terry, from an air crash in a very densely populated area will be significant. The hospitals in the area, according to reports, are already being overwhelmed. An enormous plume of smoke that we're seeing in the air from where the flight has gone down.
And we're just hearing that flight radars, which was received, the last signal came from the aircraft just seconds after takeoff. So it does appear that this crash happened pretty shortly after this Air India plane took off from this airport. And we are struggling to get information at the moment, but up to anywhere between 100 and 240 people thought to be on board, which is a lot. Already there's talk that the local emergency services have been pretty overwhelmed, as you can imagine. And the signal came just after seconds after the plane took off. So, as I say, it took off from the Gujarati part of India, and the Gujarati population in this country is substantial.
So we're looking at the picture of the flight path here on the screen as this is taking off from Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport, and the aircraft plunged into the Megani area of the city, triggering, of course, an immediate emergency response. It is too early, Terry, to say what might have caused this, but in your experience, your significant expertise of why planes crash, what would your gut instinct be telling you at this stage?
Oh, boy, it's really hard to say, because there are so many possible factors, and it's so dangerous to start guessing without a little bit more information, at least. I mean, some crashes do follow patterns, and you can maybe make some kind of conjecture, but all we know at the moment is that it went down pretty soon after takeoff. So, that makes you think of something rather sudden and rather dramatic. Now, I mean, obviously, there have been a number of issues recently over bird strikes. It's technically possible that something like a huge flock of large birds could have done it. But, we're guessing, and, it could have been a bomb, it could have been some...
We've got, Toby, just to jump in here, if people are listening on the radio, we've got the first scenes from the city of Meghani with huge pools of black smoke hanging above the city from the impact of the plane, which has crashed into the city of Meghani Nagar, which is very close to the airport, just a few kilometres from the airport. Which is why the emergency services are overwhelmed. We're not clear yet if it crashed into houses, but it crashed into the city itself, which is why this is going to potentially become a major catastrophe. And just to remind you, if you're just tuning in, the plane, it was an Air India plane, it was bound for Gatwick Airport with up to 242 people on board, although some Reuters was suggesting the figure could be lower. Shockingly, this is terrifying for families who are waiting for the plane just taken off. 3 loud explosions were reported before impact. A Boeing 787. We don't think that. Terry, has this plane? Just to tell us about the history of this plane, the Boeing 787. Is there any history of crashes with a plane of the 787?
No, not really. And you know, it's very seldom down to an aircraft type. It's usually down to other factors, and they are considerable, which is why I've managed to fill a whole book about it. It's so often human factors. You know, you try, the legislators and the designers try very hard to eliminate all the obvious risks, and everything is duplicated. And as I said earlier, public transport aircraft are required to suffer a major failure at the most critical point of takeoff and then continue safely, clearing all the obstacles and even being able to continue to their destination. So it's very hard to understand why something like this would happen so suddenly and so soon after takeoff. I mean, obviously, looking at the big ball of smoke, it's very hard to imagine that there will be survivors, but you know, it's going to be an awful thing. I mean, a bit later on today, we may have a little bit of a glimmer of more information, but at this stage, you know, we know nothing really.
We're just hearing from the Indian Aviation Ministry, which says the plane, the words they're using, it fell after departure on the ground outside the airport perimeter. And of course, this town of Meghani is very close to the airport, Terry. So it seems virtually almost after takeoff, whatever catastrophic malfunction happened took place.
Yes, or for whatever reason, the aircraft could not climb as intended, as designed. Now that could be a number of reasons, and again, you know, there's very little point in speculating at this stage because the number of possibilities are so great that we could be here all day and still be wrong.
Yeah. What are the challenges that the emergency services face in the immediate aftermath of an event like this?
Well, looking at those pictures, it'll be the fire. You know, obviously they should be well trained and well equipped to deal with such an event. I mean, it's what airport fire crews train for all the time. But obviously, you know, if it's actually in a load of buildings, just pure access to it might be difficult. And obviously, if it's still burning, they've got to be able to get that under control in order to get there. But sadly, I would have thought the chances of survivors from this are pretty slim.
Terry, stay with us. We're going to talk now to Simon Calder, who is the legendary travel editor of The Independent. Simon, morning to you. Grim news coming out of India. What can you tell us about Air India? Is it it's a highly respected airline?
Yes, Air India has been in business for decades. It has recently actually had a real makeover, focusing much more on quality. It has a reasonably good safety record, not anything like as good as the UK and Irish airlines, but it is regarded as a professional outfit. And the aircraft involved as well, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, that has a very good record as well. And as we were hearing, it is, well, these days, it's almost unheard of that an international jet flight will crash like this. We are living at a time in this decade where aviation has never been safer. And these horrible images, the tragedy that I fear is going to unfold as a result of this is just beyond words. It is a desperate situation for the loved ones of the families on board and quite possibly people on the ground as well, because, well, the flight tracking website Flight Radar 24 is saying that there is a very that the aircraft had gained very little height before they lost contact with it, and they're normally very good at keeping tabs on all the planes flying at any one time.
And Simon, Terry was making the point, our previous guest is making the point that it's unusual for the plane not to be able to gain altitude so early on. So clearly, whatever it was, whatever the problem was, struck almost after takeoff.
Yes, very much so. Sorry.
Are you still with us?
Yes, I am. I'm so sorry. I'm having problems with my system here. Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, and clearly it is way too early to speculate, but takeoff and landing are the most dangerous aspects of any journey, and it's just awful that this should have happened. There will be very significant investigations beginning immediately. They will involve, of course, the Indian Civil Aviation Authority, the makers of the aircraft, Boeing, Federal Aviation Administration of the US, and probably because the aircraft was bound for London Gatwick Airport, also the UK Air Accident Investigation Branch. It's beyond words, honestly, Andrew, the tragedy involved here, because everybody has kind of felt that they have the right to step on board an aircraft, and they and their loved ones know that they will safely get to the other end. Aviation, it has, it remains extremely safe, but clearly an issue like this is going to alarm people. I would say that is understandable, but for instance, I'm flying from Palma to London tonight. I have no fears about that because I keep tabs on aviation safety. However, this is just an example that things can happen that are unspeakably tragic.
We're looking, everybody's looking for information on this as it unravels. India today is reporting that sources suggest that the ex-Gujarat Chief Minister, Vijay Rupani, was on board the flight. So an important, I presume that is a sort of the equivalent. I don't know what the equivalent would be as the Chief Minister of that region.
Well, it'd be like the governor of California, something like that.
Yeah.
And we also, Sam, we're also hearing there were 242 people on board the aircraft, 230 passengers, 2 pilots, and 10 cabin crew members.
Yes, and that sounds about right for this relatively new route flying from Ahmedabad to London Gatwick. It's one of a number of routes to and from Gatwick, which Air India has started mainly to serve there's obviously some business travel, some leisure travel, but it's also very much to serve families travelling British people of Indian descent, and so I'm just desperately sorry, desperately sad for all of the people involved in this tragedy. Yes, there will immediately be speculation, I am sure, about the proximity of the Pakistani border, about the current tensions between Pakistan and India, but I would caution people to jump to any conclusions until the investigators have had a chance to look into this.
There are more kind of eyewitnesses reports coming out on the Indian wires at the moment, on the Indian news sites, saying that the Air India Dreamliner took off from Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport, lost altitude minutes later. Eyewitnesses are saying they saw flames and smoke billowing from the aircraft as it plummeted to the ground. Yet to be confirmed, of course. It is an area that has immense tensions between India and Pakistan at the moment. It would be, of course, easy to conclude that there could be terrorist involvement in this. It is too early to say.
Simon, do you know anything about that airport? You've travelled the world extensively. Have you been to that airport?
No, I haven't. Like a lot of British people, I've been to the key airports in Delhi and Mumbai. I've not been to Ahmedabad. There is no reason to suppose there is anything unusual about it. Clearly, the Civil Aviation Authority of India and of the UK are content for flights to be operating from there. And it's, well, look, I am shocked by this because we have got accustomed to the way that aviation was incredibly safe. And every year, sadly, you have to report on air crashes, but they are almost always these days small propeller aircraft flying domestic flights in less developed parts of the world rather than a big international airliner like this.
All right, Simon. Simon, good to talk to you, albeit on such terrible circumstances. That's Simon Calder, who is the travel editor of The Independent. Let's go back to the airline pilot and author of Confessions of an Airline Pilot, Terry Tozer. Terry, we're getting more and more about this, more details now. The 787 Dreamliner, a pretty modern plane, really.
It is, and I don't share Simon's total confidence in Air India. I mean, I don't want to sort of start casting stones at this stage, but their safety record isn't that great.
Right.
You'll remember Karachi when another one crashed in a town. But, you know, at the end of the day, we can talk about this until the cows come home. We don't know anything at the moment.
Sorry, Terry, you're going to be a man in demand today with your expertise on this. So
I think so.
Let's just bring on...
I mean, it's not really what one wants to be in demand for.
No.
I mean, it's one of those things of today, I think.
Yeah, let's just bring our viewers and listeners up to speed if people are just turning on now at 10:23 this morning. What we know so far is that an Air India Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner was en route from Ahmedabad in India, in Gujarat in India. These are live pictures we're seeing here now. The plane was making its way to London Gatwick Airport. It crashed shortly after takeoff in the afternoon in India. It was flight AI-171 carrying, we believe, 242 passengers. And, of course, there will have been...
I think that includes the crew.
And that includes the crew at this point, does it? When it went down after departing from the airport, it took off at 1:17 p.m. in India. We're hearing, Terry, I don't know if we've got Terry or whether he's gone to... he's still there. Terry, we're hearing that the plane reportedly crashed from an altitude of 825 feet.
I mean, it's hardly... Terry, that's hardly anything.
Low.
It barely got off the ground.
Yeah, close to my guesstimate, I suppose. Yeah, but I mean, what can I say? Why would it do that? You know,
would that make it less likely that it would have crashed into a huge flock of birds? Because you would have assumed a huge flock of birds would be much higher up than 880 feet.
Well, not necessarily, but
really?
I mean, I'm just throwing ideas into it because we don't know anything, and so I mean, it's most unlikely that was the cause because aircraft are designed to withstand a fair amount of bird strikes, and you know, I only mention it is because we've had a couple of instances recently, because basically there is no logical reason why this should have happened. You know, we have to know more. And at the moment, we're just guessing. We just don't know, you know, what might have caused this. It could be anywhere from the crew making a mistake. It could be terrorist activity. It could be some catastrophic failure of the aircraft. Unlikely, but possible. There are so many things that are possible that, you know, really until we get more information, it's really not much point in trying to come up with an idea, to be honest.
No. All right, Terry, I'm just looking at Air India's travel safety record. According to Air India operates a relatively modern fleet, and the number of accidents per million flights has decreased significantly over the last decade. In 2023, Air India had one of its safest years in aviation with no fatal accidents involving commercial flights, and it's also been dramatically increasing its crew training. But we're seeing images now of the plane. I mean, it really was within seconds. It effectively crashed during takeoff.
There are images coming out now. Well, we will show... Obviously, we're looking at the live pictures here on your screen. Absolute confusion, chaos, shock, disarray in India there as this flight, which was on its way to Gatwick. There are some images that look like it exploded before it hit the ground, but obviously we can't say as of yet. But what we do know is that there are hundreds of emergency services on site because, of course, it crashed outside the perimeter fence of the airport in a densely populated area. It was travelling to London. It crashed during takeoff. The smoke is extraordinary. If you're not watching on TV, if you're listening to us on the radio, the cloud of black smoke is impossible to describe, actually, of how enormous it is.
Let's talk to the avian expert, Sally Gessin, who joins us now. Sally, you're seeing this. I'm sure you're seeing. Oh no, we're going to come back to you. We haven't got Sally. The line's gone down. We'll go back to Sally. But say, just if you're just tuning in, this Air India flight that has crashed on takeoff with 242 people, including crew, on board. Suggestions that a former senior minister or chief minister of the Gujarat area province was on board. And just to remind you, in Britain we have a very large Gujarati population. This is a major town in the province of Gujarati, 635,000 estimate, and this plane was on its way to Gatwick Airport when it crashed effectively on takeoff. If you're listening on the radio, large pools of black smoke above the wreckage, which appeared to explode almost on takeoff.
That's what the initial images look like, and a huge fireball. Flight radar is saying that it received the last signal from the aircraft just seconds after takeoff. So, as we say, it got a matter of feet off the ground. That number was
not even 1,000 feet. Mark White's our Home Security editor. Mark, terrible, bleak news.
Yeah, I mean, very worrying indeed. Of course, we all know in aviation that takeoff and landings are the most dangerous part of that flight process. Once you're up at altitude in the cruise, then things in terms of technical issues are much easier dealt with. But when you're trying to take off an aircraft full of passengers, full of luggage, full of fuel, you have to get the calculations absolutely right, or you could be really struggling in terms of the ability to get off the ground in the first place.
That's the point, isn't it? It had just taken off, so the plane really was full of fuel for a long flight to Gatwick. What is it, about an 11, 12-hour flight to Gatwick, I think, from that region?
And it might not be as far as that, but it's certainly a good 10 hours at least. But yes, I mean the difficulty is, I think, when you're taking off, especially when you are so laden with fuels and passengers and luggage and alike, anything that goes wrong at that point, when you just don't have the altitude to be able to deal with it, and maybe to sort of glide down, if you've got issues with an engine problem, for instance, you've got no space. And obviously pilots would love to be able to have the room and the capacity when they're experiencing difficulties to turn an aircraft round and get back to an emergency runway. But if you are in a position where you are, as this aircraft seems to have been below 1,000 feet, was 625 feet, I think, when it disappeared from flight radar, less than a minute into the flight, so really still on the climb. And I mean, that tells us at least that we can rule out some issues. I mean, we've heard about incidents, not as such with the Dreamliner, but Boeing Supermax has had issues with parts of the fuselage and around the emergency doors giving way at altitude, basically, when the aircraft is compressed, and you have this massive decompression, which is obviously very dangerous and can bring an aircraft down at 675 feet or whatever.
Mark, just for people listening on the radio, we're now just showing a photograph, an image of what the plane looks like. Just reminded Mark what the plane's called, and it's a popular holiday plane.
A Dreamliner 787 Mark 8, and it's like every aircraft, of course, there are some technical issues that they encounter from time to time, but it has, a very good safety record. The Mark 9, which is coming in to operation at the moment, they're in the final phase of testing that for acceptance to airlines, has had some issues.
Mark, we're going to share with you, there's going to be some distressing images coming up now, because I think we can show you the impact of the plane's just taking off. Listening on the radio, it's just taken off. Just seconds in the air, and
it appears to descend, but it might just be the camera angle.
And then it appears to have descended rather than going up, and then a huge ball of flames.
What appears to be an explosion. Let's not dress it up. We can't really see. It might be the picture angle. It appears to have been taking off. Now, has it then started to descend, or has it just gone behind the houses? And then a huge explosion. We can't see if that is the point at which it impacted the ground.
To be honest, I think it's pretty apparent that that's the aircraft coming down and colliding with the ground. You know, you could say there's an optical illusion. Is it actually going down or disappearing over the horizon? But it's descending. And you can see the angle of the aircraft as well. It looks like the pilots are pushing this aircraft up, you know, nose up to try to get a bit, to gain a little bit more wind over the wings of the aircraft with a view to just trying to keep it in the air as long as possible. It came down in a residential area.
That's the terror, isn't it? They're just trying to get it up and over the town.
Just looking for anything that, you know, might be... Clearly there was no... At this altitude and with whatever catastrophically has happened to that aircraft, there's no chance of them being able to turn back into use an emergency runway at the airport. So you would just be looking for any potential roadway or clear bit of land. But, you know, in a built-up city like this in Ahmedabad, you're not going to find much in the way of clear areas, I would guess.
No. With no word yet on casualties, but Mark, normally we were talking to our first guest who's written that book about why do planes crash. He said you don't normally expect anyone to emerge from a crash like that.
Sadly, no. When you've got an impact like that, which is a high-speed impact going hundreds of miles an hour, and then the resulting fireball, an explosion from the impact, it's very unlikely. Listen, we can't rule anything out because you have seen miraculous cases of some passengers who've been able to walk away from what looked like absolutely unsurvivable aircraft crashes. So we just have to, you know, hope against hope that some people may have been able to walk away from this. But yeah, an absolutely awful situation, and clearly the Foreign Office, senior ministers here monitoring that, because inevitably there will be British citizens that will have been on that aircraft heading for a London airport.
Coming home.
Potentially coming home.
Relatives coming to visit families here.
Yeah, and many people may be coming over for business. We don't know. You were suggesting that there may have been a senior official or former official.
Former chief minister for the region is thought to be on the plane. I think, was it Air India was reporting that?
That's right.
Air India, and one of the Indian
website, one of the Indian wires basically
said that a very senior former chief minister on board. That will fuel all sorts of conspiracy theories. We're not going to get into those. And of course, there is huge tension at the moment between India and Pakistan over Kashmir.
Yes, no, there absolutely is. And of course, while you can never rule anything in or out so early on in this incident, I think looking at that image of the aircraft going over again as we are there, there certainly doesn't look to be any kind of impact or explosion in the aircraft before it came down. It looks to have been descending, and then it's clearly hit the ground on impact, the fireball and explosion resulting from that. So that might point to sort of a more mechanical issue at play here. However, it doesn't preclude something happening in the cockpit. You know, you just never know. You can't really rule anything in or out at this stage.
The Tata Group, of course, own Air India, I believe.
That's the company which owns it.
Which we're familiar to a lot of people.
Well, they own Jaguar Land Rover.
Yes, absolutely. And Air India is an absolutely massive company, and you know, in what will is rapidly becoming the world's most populous country. So Air India,
one of the fastest growing economies.
Yes, absolutely, and of course, huge links to the UK, not just the fact that so many people of Indian descent, like our former Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak and others, are here living in this country as UK citizens. Many others who come across and are involved in trade and commerce in the UK, other business and defence links, all of the above. So you can imagine that there would have been many people with links to the UK on that flight.
The Tata Group have actually, it's a terrible synchronicity, but they had the anniversary only 4 days ago. It says 77 years ago, on this very day, Air India International changed India's aviation industry forever. They took their inaugural flight from Mumbai to London, taken off a little after midnight, and it was a 40-seater Malabar Princess's passenger list. And it contained all sorts of Indian dignitaries on that inaugural flight for Air India 77 years ago. That was on June the 8th, 4 days ago. And of course now, June the 12th will be forever known by Air India and the Tata Group that owns it as a day of absolute tragedy. If you're listening on the radio, we're getting pictures through which are, some of them are so disturbing that we are choosing not to show them to you. If you are just joining us, a London-bound Boeing 787 on its way from India to London Gatwick has crashed just moments after takeoff in a very populated area of Gujarat.
Yeah, Mark, I mean, it crashed on takeoff.
Yes, and very soon after takeoff, say less than a minute into the flight. So because of that, it was at a very low level, and that just really takes away that luxury that a pilot might have at 32 or 35,000 feet. Something goes wrong up there, you've got a long time to be able to resolve the situation. You can potentially glide towards an area of flatter ground or a local airport, whatever you might do if you suffered complete engine failure. There's lots you can do at height. There's very little that you can do when you're such a low level. And as this aircraft was, as I say, it seemed when it was coming down to be sort of pushing nose up to try and catch a bit more wind over the wings of the aircraft.
We just want to show you what we have so far of the event. If you might find this disturbing because this is the moment where the plane either hits the ground or explodes on impact. We're watching the flight here. Somebody's obviously filming it on their phone. It's taking off. It appears to descend a little, and then we just see an enormous fireball and a plume of smoke.
Barely a minute after takeoff.
Yeah.
And that flight was destined for London Gatwick.
And our viewers actually, Mark, agreeing with what you were saying, that it doesn't look as though it was able to get enough power to climb.
Sure.
And then it's exploded as it has hit the ground.
Stay with us, Mark. We've got the aviation expert, Sally Gethin, joining us now. Sally, you've had a chance, morning to you, you've had a chance to look at these images. What's your first take on this terrible tragedy?
I would think of such a vast scale of a crash happening to the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. I mean, it really is the workhorse of the skies for modern, carriers, airlines that are right in the forefront of driving long-haul travel in commercial air transport. And given Boeing's checkered recent history, it's had some massive problems at Boeing over the last several years. And this will be a body blow to that airplane manufacturer, regardless at this point of what caused the actual crash.
Sally, just to step in there, just remind us what those problems were. Mark White alluded to them earlier. Just explain what those problems were with those planes.
Yes, so just going back before the pandemic, there were two massive plane crashes with the Boeing 737 MAX, and 346 lives were lost. They were both catastrophic, but the really disturbing one was the Ethiopian Airlines one, which literally nosedived into the ground and pretty much vaporized and disintegrated. I'm sorry to say that. It was really worrying, and it turned out to be a flaw that Boeing had created itself with that particular aircraft type. And as a result of that, massive scrutiny and investigations were placed onto Boeing for years. I mean, it's barely come out of the woods on that front. It's made settlements recently with the next of kin to families, and that was not disclosed, the actual amounts, but it was criminally investigated for those issues. And there was a change at the top of Boeing, at the leadership, as a result of that. I mean, more recently, Boeing's got Kelly Ortberg, who's got a fantastic reputation, and he's really steered the company into much safer waters. And if you recall, President Trump recently was actually singing the praises of Boeing and struck a deal with the state of Qatar over orders of Boeing aircraft to the state of Qatar, for example. So it was starting to to revitalise its image. And also it's had so many safety investigations. I mean, the regulator in the United States, the Federal Aviation Administration, has had it's been crawling all over Boeing. Literally, it's had people there on the assembly floor for ages. Now, most of the emphasis has been on the Boeing 737 MAX, which has actually had limited production due to those safety issues. And the Boeing 787 has really been regarded as the success story for Boeing. So to see this awful tragedy unfold and the searing loss of life with it, I mean, just having seen that footage that you showed as well, is just devastating. I mean, it's most of all, it's devastating for the families affected. I mean, that's the primary concern right now. But aviation as a whole is a safety first industry. And there's a wider context here because recently there have been a number of headlines regarding safety of aircraft. And of course, the travelling public needs to be reassured. And while there may be individual explainable reasons for each of those incidents, I mean, there was the Washington, D.C. plane crash right at the start of the year, which was, was really worrying, that particular incident, even though, it was not in India. But this is so worrying for the travelling public, especially, we think that India is really one of the biggest industrial nations in that region, coming forward now with so much technology and a massive relationship with the UK. There would have been passengers on this plane that would be what we call VFR traffic, visiting friends and relatives as well as business people. It would have acted like an umbilical cord, really, having, Air India having that route network into the UK and into Gatwick, which is, a premier airport here in the UK. So it's such a visible, such a dramatic incident. It's so catastrophic, and we're, only now we're in the early throes of the reaction to it, but it will have repercussions well down the line for weeks and months.
Saying that they've got a pretty good safety record, Air India. They have had problems in the past, but pretty much a good record, would you say, in the last couple of years? Well, I mean,
I myself have really, I'm regularly updated by their developments. And like I said, they really are in the forefront of technology and innovation when it comes to aviation and aircraft. So, but having said that, things can be very different on the ground. So it's not only the airline that features in this. It's not only the aircraft, but it's the infrastructure. We have to think of aviation as like a city, if you like, with infrastructure and a transport network. And aviation works like that. It's a big ecosystem. And so the airports, a lot depends on aircraft, the way they're turned around at airports, the aircraft handling side of it, the passenger handling side of it. We cannot assume anything at this stage, but a lot depends on the quality of what we call ramp safety. So those are all the things that take place on the ramp. Now, the ramp is literally the part of the airport where you're waiting to board your plane at the gates, maybe, but it's the bit where you see all the ground support equipment, all the vehicles, the way that's managed, those processes.
Sally, sorry to interrupt you. Sally,
Yes.
just stay with us, but we've got some breaking news now. We now have confirmed that 217 adults and 11 children were on board that flight, that Air India flight, which crashed almost on takeoff in India's Ahmedabad. So that is bleak, even bleaker than we thought. 217 adults and 11 children. That's according to sources coming out of India, and that includes crew as well. Sally, back to you.
Yes, well, I was pointing out the way things work in aviation and commercial air transport, and I was saying that really there has to be robust measures in place at the airport as well. It has to be a sterile environment going airside. I mean, there's two parts of the airport. When you arrive at the airport, before you take the flight, we call that landside. That's everything which is before check-in. And then on the other side of that, we call that airside, and that has to be sterile. That means that all the workers that work at the airport on the airside have to be properly verified, checked. They have to be properly trained. So the aircraft itself has to be properly serviced. The turnaround times at the gate, the way that's done, the refueling, all the processes that you see sometimes when you're looking through the window from the gate.
Sally, we're going to jump in again. Sorry, just to say we're now hearing from sources that 53 Britons were on board that flight destined for London Gatwick. 53 Britons. We're trying to confirm that, but that is what sources are saying from India. 53 Britons were among the 217 adults and 11 children who were on board that flight. No word yet as to number of fatalities, but looking at the scenes, major explosion, fireball, we can show you the impact again. The prognosis can be only the bleakest. If you're listening on the radio, we're just showing again the plane on takeoff. It appears to dip, and then there's a loud explosion, and there's an eruption and a huge ball of flame, and that pall of thick, dense black smoke still hanging over the airport as the emergency services are flat out because this plane crashed into a residential area. Sally, stay with us. We've got Mark White still here. We were saying earlier, inevitably, some of the people on board would be people who live here, maybe work in India, maybe been visiting family and friends.
Yeah, and more than 50 British nationals on board. That's a very significant number. I thought it might have been more, actually, heading to London. It may be that, of course, there are family members, dual nationals. It's very early days, so more information will come out on that. But that is a very heavy loss of life for British nationals and, of course, those Indian and other nationalities out there involved in this. As you say, 217 adults and 11 children on board this aircraft as well. I'm not sure that includes the crew, but clearly there will have been adult crew on board as well. 12 members of crew. Yeah.
People often, and Mark, again, this crashed into a residential area. Always people often say, why are towns so close to airports?
Well, often, they're not initially, but towns expand.
They expand, that's what happens.
And they grow into the sort of flight path around airports. It's no different in this country. I mean, look at Heathrow and all the kind of furore that there is over a third runway there, because now there is so much in the way of sort of community infrastructure around Heathrow Airport that people quite rightly are concerned about the noise, but also the safety issues of aircraft, increasing numbers coming over the likes of Heathrow. So yes, sadly, you'll often find that. I mean, some of the more modern airports are built out of town now deliberately to ensure that they're away from sort of urban areas, because this is sadly the net effect of what you can see if it comes down in a neighbourhood. Now, looking at this, it doesn't look massively built up, so we can only hope that it came down in an area where there weren't too many blocks of flats.
The perimeter fence of the airport, hopefully.
Yeah, it wasn't far out at all. I mean, if it was only a minute or less than a minute into flight and only at 625 feet, you're not really, hopefully, in a massively built-up area, but you can clearly see houses as well. So that's the added issue here, that the authorities, the emergency services, we're hearing from Prime Minister Modi's office that all the state resources are being mobilised to help out in this search and rescue and recovery operation that is now springing into action, because it's not just the hundreds that were on board this aircraft, but also those potentially on the ground. And if you've got a dense and built-up area, residential properties, there may have been sort of factories and other things that people were in. We don't know yet, because we haven't had that significant detail from the ground, but you can see from these images emergency services just trying to get to the area with those thick plumes of black smoke descending over that neighbourhood.
There are images, obviously, these days of mobile phones. The images come thick and fast online. We're bringing you the ones that we think are appropriate to show you, because some of them obviously are deeply distressing. It looks, Mark, as though the plane impacted in part on a building that was under construction. So effectively, that what we're seeing here, OK, so this is the tail end of the plane, we believe. That building was empty because it was under construction. I mean, there may have been builders on site, of course, but it wasn't a residential, it wasn't housing, it wasn't offices, as far as we know. That will, in no doubt, mitigate to some degree the number of casualties that we're going to see, but there is no doubt the casualties are going to be absolutely significant.
Sadly, I would say, though, Bev, what will often happen is you get an impact on a building, and yes, a piece of the aircraft will break off and be embedded in that building, but the inertia with which that aircraft is coming down and the weight of that aircraft, it's continuing on and into whatever else is in its path. And so we just have to hope that if that is a building and construction site, maybe it's largely empty and it's a new development in progress and there are not residents yet in that area.
Let's hope so.
Stay with us, Mark. We're going to talk now to a former Boeing 747 pilot and aviation consultant, Alistair Rosenshine. Alistair, good morning. I hate to use the word good morning because obviously this is a terrible morning. You've seen, you've read, you've heard. What is your observation about what you've seen so far? What could have happened?
Well, the straight answer is I haven't seen a great deal. At the moment, I haven't got video on this feed we have here. But it sounds like the aircraft has impacted into a building. And that's very similar to what happened to the Air France Concorde taking off from Paris, which also impacted a building, and an El Al 747 at Amsterdam, a cargo aircraft, which also flew into a building.
Alistair, am I right in thinking that you've actually flown the same model of plane, the Boeing 747, the 787 this is it?
Yeah, it's a Dreamliner 787.
Dreamliner, sorry, yeah.
No, I've flown Boeing 737s and, of course, the Boeing 747, which is larger than the Dreamliner. The Dreamliner is a twin-engined aircraft. It's a modern aircraft. It's got a good safety record. And it would be wrong to speculate that this accident was aircraft type specific at this point.
Stay there, Alistair, because we've got some more breaking news now from Mark White, who's our Home Security Editor. Mark.
Well, the regulator now in India confirming that the crew of this aircraft were able to send off a Mayday. So that tells you that clearly something catastrophic may well have been happening, but not to the point where it incapacitated everyone on board. So not an explosion. We can see from the images that there didn't appear to be any explosion as the aircraft was coming down, only on impact there. So I think that's significant. Clearly, at some point, they're giving a Mayday. They're probably trying to see if there is any way of being able to reroute this aircraft. But as I say, given the fact that they were just descending
too low,
engine trouble, whatever it might have been, they were just not able to get any kind of altitude with a view to coming round. But they clearly were dealing with a very significant problem on board. They sent a Mayday in the seconds before they impacted the ground.
Fascinating.
What, Alistair, I think you're still with us, aviation consultant Alistair Rosenshine. Yes. What would your assessment be of that if the crew were able to make a Mayday sign, followed by radio silence, followed by impact?
Well, they made the Mayday because obviously they needed help. You only make a Mayday call when you actually need a help. And in this case, it would presumably be help to return to the airport. But, you know, if there was then radio silence from them, that's because they've got their hands full trying to control this aircraft. So whether it's a double engine failure or something, I'm trying to think of the sort of things that can bring an aircraft down after takeoff. But it would involve a double engine failure or flight control failure. I mean, one could speculate here on so many different things. But takeoff and landing are, of course, the most, well, let's put it, risky part of a flight. When you're near the ground, the cruise part of a flight is the one where there are very few accidents and incidents. But takeoffs, the aircraft's at maximum weight, it's on very high power engines, and of course it's carrying a full load of fuel for the journey it's doing. So in this case, it would have had about 9 hours of fuel on board.
You've flown to India many times, I think, Alistair.
Yes, that's right, yes. But I haven't been to this particular airport, Mumbai, Delhi, etc., but not to this one.
What will the process be now, Alistair, in order to establish what might have happened? What kicks in at this stage?
Well, obviously, the first thing is to try and rescue people and get them to hospital, and you know that will be the primary thing to do. Of course, they've got to preserve the accident site and try and recover the flight deck data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, because the two black boxes will contain most of the information on this flight, on the position of the flight controls, the engine power settings, and anything that may have gone wrong. And that can be assessed relatively rapidly, because the aircraft's gone down on the land, and the authorities will know what part of the aircraft to look for these two black boxes, which are actually bright orange in colour.
Yeah. We're looking now, we're hearing from Reuters that the Air India plane had 169 Indian passengers, 53 British, 1 Canadian and 7 Portuguese passengers on board.
And 12 crew.
And
maybe that's included in the
that might
statistics.
include the crew, of course.
Let's go back to Mark White, who's got more news.
Well, we're told now one of the latest lines coming through is that the Air India aircraft crashed onto a hostel building for doctors.
Oh dear.
So no more word than that, but hostel building for doctors, and also a bit more detail coming through from the regulator. So confirming there were reports of 244 on board. They say 242 people on board, 2 pilots, 10 cabin crew, and the captain, we're told, had 8,200 hours of flying experience. The co-pilot had 1,100 hours of flying experience. So the captain of this aircraft, at least clearly an experienced commander.
Yeah, Alistair, just on that's a very experienced pilot, over 8,000 hours.
Well, yes. I mean, put it in perspective, I had 15,000 hours after 30 years of flying. So 8,500, he would be very experienced. The first officer, however, could only be described as relatively inexperienced. With 1,000 hours, he wouldn't have been flying airliners for maybe more than 300 hours, something of that order. So you end up with, you know, it's nice to have both pilots and both seats being experienced, because then they can help each other out much better than when you've got an inexperienced co-pilot.
Well, Alistair, thank you for that. Mark, we're just about to go to the break. Any more to tell us?
Well, I think just that very worrying news before we go to the break, which is that this, according to reports, this aircraft crashed onto a hostel housing doctors in that area. We don't know how many people on the ground were caught up in this.
Because, of course, the numbers that we've been talking about are the passengers on board, but it did crash into a residential area, so that number inevitably will be rising. Thank you for staying with us on Britain's Newsroom this morning on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
And it is 11 o'clock. This is Britain's Newsroom. Big breaking news this morning. Warning, what we're about to show you is graphic.
Horrific scenes coming to us this morning from northern India, where a plane bound for London Gatwick has crashed with at least 242 people on board, including reports telling us that there were 53 passengers on board.
From Britain.
From Britain.
Desperate searches are now underway. Those on board included 217 adults, and there were also 11 children. We're hearing how the plane crashed onto a hostel building which was for doctors. Home Security Mark White still with us.
Yeah, Commons leader Lucy Powell has spoken, saying that the government will offer as much assistance as they possibly can to those caught up in this, and especially, of course, the families of the 53 British nationals who were on board. 169, I think you said, Bev, were Indian. There were Canadian and Portuguese nationals on board this aircraft as well. 242 people in total, according to the aviation regulator. 10 of those were cabin crew, 2 of those were pilots. And as we mentioned a short time ago, 8,200 flying hours, the experience of the captain of this aircraft. So clearly an experienced man in command of this aircraft. It had, according to the regulator, crashed less than a minute after takeoff, just beyond the perimeter of this aircraft at 625 feet, ploughing into this residential area. As we mentioned before, it seems one of the buildings it connected with was a building that was under construction, but it may have gone on other parts of the wreckage to collide with a hostel that was housing doctors. As it was 10 in the morning, it's got to be hoped that people were out at work, but
sure. And Mark,
work shifts.
We now know that there was a Mayday released from within the stricken plane just seconds before the crash.
Yeah, a brief Mayday, according to regulators, and then no further response from the crew. Of course, at that time, the aircraft had impacted the ground. They had very little time. As I say, we're talking less than a minute, and as your experts have been saying as well, the pilots, really, they have very little time to do anything. And actually, to get out any kind of Mayday call is unusual, because they're usually just grappling with everything they can in terms of the controls of this aircraft to keep it, airborne. So at some point, they've clearly managed to get a brief message off, perhaps, as they knew they were going to impact the ground.
And we know about the plane. It's a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. One of our early guests, Aviation, is saying it's the workhorse of the fleet.
Yes, well, you remember, of course, the Boeing 737 used to be the workforce of the fleet. That's kind of had its day. It's been phased out by most airlines now. And the Dreamliner was absolutely seen as the future of aviation, just because of the way it's constructed. I think it was fiberglass construction, a lot of this aircraft, so it could be lighter. It could then carry more passengers. With a smaller aircraft, but they could have, the way they configured it, the interiors of the aircraft were actually quite roomy. And the safety record of the Dreamliner is pretty good. They've had problems. Every aircraft has some technical issues and design issues that they have to sort of grapple with in the early years of this aircraft, but it's been relatively good. The latest model, the 9 series coming out, has had a few more issues that they've been dealing with before handing on to airlines. This model, though, the 787-8 series, less issues. So there'll be, of course, a great deal of concern from Boeing. They've had their issues with the Boeing Supermax aircraft with catastrophic events, disasters that have befallen the Supermax fleet.
One, didn't we?
Yes, absolutely. And we've had structural issues with exit doors that have blown off at height as well. So no indication that clearly it wasn't at any kind of height that you could have a catastrophic decompression of this aircraft anyway. So I guess they're looking at something like engine failure, some kind of engine issues. A bird strike is always a potential as well. We know, we've seen it on multiple occasions over the years where pilots have been impacted by birds. Again, if you're impacted by birds when you're coming into land, it can be less of an issue because you're lower down, you're on the sort of glide path to the airport anyway. But of course, if you're just taking off, And often there are birds around airports. That's why they employ people, professional bird scarers, to go around. They have birds of prey that they take around to try and scare off birds as well.
Let's bring Alistair Rosenshine, who's a former Boeing 747 pilot and aviation consultant. Alistair, we're just talking about this 787 Dreamliner. As Mark was saying, it was the modern-day role model for commercial flights.
I mean, it's a safe aircraft. It is a well-built aircraft. There have only been minor issues with the aircraft in the past. I remember they had problems with some of the lithium-ion batteries on board, but that was sorted out, and they did some redesigns. And at this point, it's impossible to know what the cause of the accident is. As I said, it may not be aircraft-specific. In other words, that this accident could have happened perhaps to any model of aircraft. If it was an external thing that had caused it. Of course, if it was mechanical, then it would be aircraft specific. But it's so difficult, and one should try and avoid speculating this stage with so little information. But as I say, the two black boxes will be recovered very quickly, and they'll be analysed, and the authorities at least will know fairly quickly what has caused this accident. And if it has something to do with the aircraft, this specific model of aircraft, then of course a safety bulletin will be sent out urgently to all operators of this aircraft around the world. And there are many, many airline companies operating the 787. It really... We simply don't know what happened. I mean, there was, as you just mentioned, possibly birds, losing engines. It's difficult at this point to speculate with quite so little information. What we can hope is that there have been as few fatalities or injuries as possible.
Thank Alistair. Mark White,
Well, somebody's pointed out here. Keith, who's watching, says, Mark, you might know, and actually Alistair might know as well, watching the footage as it goes past, you would expect to hear the engines roaring at full power, and all you hear is the bypass power from the fan. Did you pick up on that, Alistair?
For some reason, I can only see myself on the screen, not the actual accident. But eyewitnesses, etc., are notoriously unreliable with aircraft accidents, and that's been shown the case in almost every accident where the public has reported what they hear, what they see, and it has been quite often very wide of the mark. But as your caller correctly said, one should be hearing the engines at full power, because, or pretty much full power, as it's on takeoff.
How much do these planes rely on software now, Alistair, as well? One of our viewers has got in touch and was saying he was wondering if it was a software fault. It can seem sometimes it doesn't matter what the pilots do. It's basically these planes, to some degree, fly themselves. Can you confirm or deny that?
Well, on takeoff, you're flying manually. So whilst the aircraft does rely very heavily on modern electronics and computer systems, it is actually still being manually flown, especially on a Boeing aircraft where they have literally, wired controls as opposed to computer controls. So it's not a side stick like on an Airbus. It's the control column is actually connected to wires. And so it is unlikely that this is a software problem at this point.
It does feel a little... I'm a little uncomfortable with the speculation at this point, but look, this is breaking news.
Yeah. It is still, Mark White, it is pretty unusual for a plane of this magnitude to crash.
Well, plane crashes are thankfully, not very common.
Thank God.
They happen. You have, of course, they tell us that aviation is the safest form of travel. The difficulty is, of course, you crash a car, you're more than likely to walk away unscathed. You're involved in an aircraft crash. It can be pretty catastrophic with mass casualties, and that's the issue here. But yes, we're going through a period where, although there have been recently some high-profile crashes. Aviation really has never been safer compared to what it was, say, 20 years ago or so. And so they'll be looking into what on earth it could have been. As I say, it could have been potentially engine issues, bird strikes. We just don't know. All we do know is that the takeoff and the landing phase of any flight is always the most dangerous because that's when you're coming into contact with the ground at a very high rate of knots or leaving the ground at a very high rate of knots, trying to get up to your altitude and your cruising altitude. If something goes wrong, when you're at low level, there's very little time to do much about it. And often, clearly, at 625 feet, there's just not the capability to go and come round and try and land at an airport, that same airport again.
The Gujarati community in Britain is pretty large, 635,000, quite a large population in London, I know for sure.
Yes, there is, absolutely. They will be tuned, I'm sure, to all of the broadcasters trying to get as much information on this as possible. It will be felt very keenly in those communities, and that's why, of course, any British citizens, a group of 50 caught up in a terrible tragedy like that, it's a very, very significant number. And that's why we've had the government saying that it will do all they can to help and support the families of those involved in this.
Nothing they can do, really, though, is there? I mean,
there isn't an awful lot.
Warm words from the leader of the Congress.
Of course. And in any...
India's quite capable of handling this itself.
In any incident like this as well, it's always horrific for the families, not just because of the fact that they may be losing loved ones, but the confusion that there is around these issues in the first hours when nobody really knows anything, when all officialdom in India is running about, the emergency services desperately trying to deal with the situation themselves. Information feeding back to the families, the loved ones, is often very limited. So it's terrible. You don't know what the potential outcome would be.
Just some breaking news. The Prime Minister has put out a statement. Sir Keir Starmer says the scenes emerging of a London-bound plane carrying many British nationals crashing in the Indian city of Ahmedabad are devastating.
He added that he was being kept updated as the situation develops. Mark White, should we just, if people are tuning in now, 11:13, let's just recap on what's happened this morning. I'm sorry that our normal news agenda has been put to one side for now. Obviously, this is an international incident, but there were 53 British people on board, as we know. So what has happened, Mark? Remind everyone.
Well, this aircraft was heading to London Gatwick from this city, Ahmedabad, in Gujarat. It had taken off, as you can see there from these clearly disturbing images. It was less than a minute into its flight, and rather than gaining altitude, as it should have been doing in the climb to its cruising altitude, it was descending rapidly into what has been described as a residential neighbourhood. 625 feet was the maximum height it had attained before it disappeared from the radar, according to the Flight Radar tracking app. We're told that 242 people were on board this aircraft. 12 of them were aircrew. That's 2 pilots and 10 cabin crew. The 2 pilots, the captain, we're told, according to the aviation administrator, was a pilot of some 8,200 hours flying experience. So he had a long time and was an experienced man in command of this aircraft. The co-pilot, a more junior officer, just 1,100 flying hours. But at this stage, we just don't know what it was that caused this. You can see from the images here the massive response from the emergency services and local people, frankly, on the ground, with the thick plumes of black smoke rising from that residential neighbourhood. neighbourhood. And another worrying aspect of this, although Bev told us earlier that one of the buildings impacted was a building under construction, which clearly we have to hope means that there weren't any people, maybe construction workers, but not people living in that building. But it appears, according to reports, that the aircraft or parts of the aircraft may have collided with a hostel for doctors, medical staff at one of the local hospitals.
Which is even more shocking.
Yeah, I mean, especially as probably one of the hospitals they work for will be dealing with the casualties from this.
Absolutely. And just to remind people again, the plane in particular, 787 Dreamliner, it's been described as the workhorse of the commercial aviation fleet.
Yes, it absolutely is. And Air India themselves had just, in the last couple of days, been promoting the Dreamliner and what an amazing aircraft it was, and the safety record, which is true. The safety record of this aircraft is, pretty good, exemplary, really. Every aircraft type has some kind of technical issues early in development, but really as an aircraft out there flying, an aircraft that uses 50% of carbon composites just to ensure that it's lighter, be more economical. They can get more passengers in this aircraft, but it can still be roomy. So it really is seen as an attractive airline. It's loved by many of the airlines that operate this aircraft. And as I say, ironically, Air India just in the last couple of days promoting this aircraft and its safety record.
Extraordinary, isn't it? Let's go back to the travel editor of The Independent, Simon Calder. Simon, with your vast contacts, any more you can tell us about this unfolding tragedy?
Well, you've been covering it extremely well on GB News, Andrew, and the main point that I want to get across is that it is way too early to speculate. We've obviously heard about the various possible explanations for this. It's guaranteed that the investigators from India, from the US, where the plane was made, from the UK, where the aircraft was going, will be wanting to get to the scene and to try to find the flight data recorder, the cockpit voice recorder, in order to analyze those immediately. They want to do this partly because, of course, everybody affected and the wider world wants to understand what happened, but also if there is some hidden flaw, for example, that is potentially a threat for other aviation, then that will need to be dealt with. Crucially, though, also, there will be people who are watching who are thinking, OK, we have now had a whole series of terrible tragedies in the past 6 months. For example, you might recall on Christmas Day, there was the Azerbaijani aircraft that was actually shot down by the Russians, limped across the Caspian Sea and crashed with most of those on board sadly losing their lives. Then we had the incident of a flight going from Bangkok to South Korea, which landed and ploughed into a wall. And again, tragically, almost everybody lost their lives on that event. But overall, the 2020s are the safest decade ever for aviation. Whatever happened in this tragic case, the information that investigators get will be used to help future passengers stay safer. That is the way that aviation safety has always worked, even past tragedy. But this, of course, is set against the desperate loss of life that we have seen, both on the aircraft, possibly tragically on the ground, and the fact that so many people, British people, will be affected directly by this is, for us, just particularly awful, and our hearts go out to them.
Simon, we've heard the terrible news that 53 Britons on board. Have we lost Simon?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I heard that. Yeah.
53 Britons we're now hearing on board, and 11 children amongst the what we perceive are certainly the casualties at the very least.
Yes, and this will be, I'm sorry to say, the highest loss of life of British passengers for many years, because UK airlines, Irish Airlines are extraordinarily safe. The last fatal accident involving a British jet aircraft was back in the 1980s, and the desperate tragedy involved in this will, of course, touch so many lives. The children whose lives were lost, the British people, and of course, everybody in India who is affected by this as well. Desperate times.
Obviously, India, densely populated, I think the most densely populated country in the world.
It's rapidly becoming the most populous country in the world. It will soon overtake China.
I'm just going to say to Simon, if people in India wish to cover large areas, particularly in the country itself, train travel is popular, isn't it? But also can be quite controversial amongst Indian people. Just explain to us a little bit how easy it is to get around the country.
Well, India has Indian Railways, biggest transport undertaking in the world. Last time I checked, 500,000 people worked for it. Hundreds of millions of people every day travelled on Indian Railways. Mixed safety record, mixed efficiency, but getting better, like all railways are in many parts of Asia all the time. But we have seen, just as in the UK in the past, and Europe in the past 3 decades, we've seen the rise of low-cost aviation. That has certainly taken hold in India. Lots of very good airlines flying around. And while there have been very isolated tragedies, the overall level of safety in India remains very good. And look, all I can say is that when we learn what caused this terrible tragedy, I think it will be shown to be perhaps the cause of a whole series of factors, and that it will be one of those awful incidents that could not have been predicted. I just don't know. It's too early to speculate, but please, if you are traveling to India, I know it's difficult, but the main problem actually in terms of loss of life is on the roads of India rather than in the skies or on the railways. But the scenes that we are seeing, the stories that will unfold on GB News in the coming days are just beyond tragic.
All right, that's Simon Calder, the Travel Aid Independent. Mark White still with us. Mark, this will be dominant now.
Yes, we're told that King Charles is being kept up to date with the unfolding situation. We've heard from the Prime Minister that this is clearly absolutely devastating. To lose 53 British nationals in a tragedy, wherever that has taken place, is very significant for this country. And we await to see just who those potential individuals caught up in this are. What we can tell you is that this was flight Air India 171 taking off from this airport in Ahmedabad in Gujarat at 10 a.m. local time this morning, when just less than a minute into the flight, it had not long cleared the perimeter fence of the airport, had only reached 625 feet. When, as we can see from these clearly graphic and disturbing images, it just descended and crashed into what we're told is a local neighbourhood.
Yeah, we're looking. There's some pictures emerging now, Mark, of, and we'll bring them when we can confirm them. But it appears to be the BJ Medical College UG Hostel in Magani. which was impacted by the plane, internal images from there. Let's talk briefly to Robert Courts, former Minister for Aviation. Good morning, Robert. We know there are 53, from what we're understanding, there were 53 British passengers on board. Just your reaction to this tragic story this morning, please. Good morning, Robert.
Morning. It's one of those terrible circumstances when words are inadequate, isn't it? It's truly horrifying. And the immediate reaction, of course, it's a human tragedy. First, second and third, 53 British nationals and hundreds of all nationalities. It's an utterly nightmare scenario on a human level, of course, for everyone involved.
When you have aviation as part of your portfolio, as you previously did, what does a day like this feel like, actually?
Well, the human reaction is first, second and third. You know, if you're holding an office, you know, you still naturally have that immediate reaction to think of the people and of the families and of those who are worried about loved ones. You have a number of tasks that you'll immediately do. You'll look to gain as much information as you possibly can. You'll look to coordinate wherever you can, so bring together the right people, ensure that the people who need to know things know what they need to know. You'll also be very keen to put out information as much as you can that is reliable. And the things that Mark and Simon have been saying on your call thus far are absolutely right. It is critical not to speculate. There will be time enough for that. There are very highly trained, extraordinary, dedicated professionals who will be looking into what happened. There is simply no way that anyone can possibly know at the moment. And speculation can be very damaging, as well as clearly can come to the wrong conclusion. So it's very important not to do that, and not to say anything that makes it worse, and not to speculate. It's probably also right that I do just echo the things that the others have been saying as well, which is that this is a terribly tragic incident, but commercial aviation has an extraordinarily good safety record all over the world. Thousands of flights departing every day.
OK, that's Robert Courts, former Minister for Aviation. Thanks for joining us. Interesting, Simon Calder talked about this is the worst loss of British life in commercial air flight. And you have to go back to 1989. It was the Kegworth air crash when that 737 actually crashed into a motorway. Do you remember that, Mark?
I do. Yes, I think that was 1982.
1989.
Because
1980. It was a little later, in the 80s. But it was 39 people died on impact, and another 8 died, and that was a British Midland flight.
You're 100% right, because it was just not long, a month or two after Lockerbie.
That's exactly right.
And Lockerbie, of course, it wasn't a British aircraft or bound for the UK, but it had taken off from Heathrow.
I think more Brits died on the impact.
Yes, absolutely. Well, 269 people on the aircraft, 11 on the ground with Lockerbie and Kegworth, you're right. And if we go back to the Manchester airport tragedy as well, involving that British Airways aircraft on the ground. I think it was at least 50 people that died in that aircraft when it was engulfed in flames, and many people just didn't get off that aircraft in time. It's absolutely horrific.
Some of the images that are coming out, Mark, and obviously we can only show you what we can show you. The heat. Let me just bring you this quote we have here. This is...
I think it's the chairman of Air India.
The chairman of Air India. The chairman of Air India, Chandrasekaran, Mr. Chandrasekaran, says, our primary focus is on supporting all the affected people and their families. We're doing everything in our power to assist the emergency response teams at the site and to provide all necessary support and care to those impacted. The point I was about to make is the heat on the ground, the temperature, because of that enormous fireball. It has, I mean, it's no exaggeration, it looks like a war zone. Everything that in its path is just melted. 9 hours of fuel on board. Exactly. So a plane was taking off. It had, I don't know how many gallons and litres of fuel.
That's a lot,
I think one of our earlier airline pilots said that would have been, but it would have sustained a 9-hour flight. So there is no surprise that the temperatures must have reached unimaginable levels on the ground there.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing about aviation fuel, it can take quite a spark actually to ignite it, but once it ignites, it burns with ferocity. And when you're talking many, many thousands of gallons of aviation fuel in fact, tons of aviation fuel for this journey across to Gatwick, and it was due to land at 6:25.
They're saying that would work out at between 27,000 and 35,000 gallons of aviation fuel, which would have erupted.
And of course, as the tanks are up, the tanks they're in the wings, they're in the fuselage of the aircraft as well on the underside. That spilled fuel is all over, because it's also travelling with the same kind of velocity as the aircraft. So the fuel then is deposited onto buildings and cars and people. So when the flames, go up, when the fuel goes up, then it spreads very rapidly to everything that is covered in that fuel. So it's absolutely horrific.
OK, let's talk now to a former journalist for the Times of India, Rahul Mitra, who joins us now. Good morning, Rahul. Hesitate to use the word good morning. Our condolences and sympathies, of course. What can you tell us from your perspective, Rahul, about this terrible tragedy?
See, it's absolutely shocking and distressing because, my elder brother lives in Ahmedabad. And he was the one to put this out on the family group first. And it's horrific to see the tragedy of this scale, because the flight just takes off, and within a few minutes it crashes. I'm actually in deep shock at the moment, because my heart is going out to, all the passengers who were on board and their families, and also the people on the ground, because when something like this happens, we're not talking about a clear field or wherever the plane unfortunately crashes. We're talking about within the heart of the city. It's absolutely just to imagine and think, the state of affairs is horrific. Very, very sad and stunned, actually, so as to put it.
Rahul, we know that 53 Britons were on board. I imagine they were probably members of the Gujarati community in Britain, because this is a part of Gujarat. Tell us about that community.
See, my connect with Gujarat and UK, both of them is very strong, because I have relatives in both the places, and I have myself visited UK and I visited Gujarat a couple of times, and the Gujarati community is very, very strong all over the world, but specifically UK. And my heart goes out to the families, to everybody for that matter. But this is really, really shocking, and it's so sad, and I am also very distressed and extremely stunned, as I used the word earlier, because unfortunately I lost my father in an air crash.
Oh dear!
When I was just out of my teens, he unfortunately passed in a chopper crash. So, being part of the family who's seen and who's faced the consequences of losing your loved one to something as horrendous as an air crash. So my heart goes out to everybody at this point in time.
We're seeing images, Rahul, on the TV screen of firefighters fighting the blaze, which is clearly on the ground, where the force of impact from the plane, which of course was carrying 9 hours of airline fuel, up to 35,000 gallons. And we're just saying that I don't know if you can see these images on your screen, Rahul, of the firefighters fighting this huge blaze on the ground. The plane, of course, was loaded with 9 hours of airline fuel.
The heat would have been immense on the ground there.
Absolutely. So I think carrying out the rescue operations right now is of paramount importance. And I just heard and saw a report that the Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, is supervising it himself, all the rescue operation, and he's he's asked the Civil Aviation Minister to, in fact, rush to Ahmedabad as we're speaking, to take a stock of, all the rescue operations personally. So a tragedy of this scale, oh my God, my heart really goes out to everybody on ground, also the brave firefighters and everybody who's now going to get involved and engaged in this rescue operation, where I think the time is essence. So I just hope that they're able to carry out the rescue operations in whatever can be salvaged.
We're seeing that Air India has actually set up a passenger helpline. There may be families watching this now of any of those 53 British passengers. The number, we will give it out to you, is 1-800 5691 444. That would be with the Indian international code 1-800 5691 444. Presumably, Raul, the lines of communication with families from Air India would be, I would imagine, pretty well handled this morning. Air India is 77 years old, actually, as an airline only this week. But a very difficult time for anybody that would be obviously concerned about if they had family members on that plane heading to London this morning. We're also seeing images because, of course, the casualties here will not just be the passengers on the plane. There will be those people who were on the ground. The plane came down about, I believe, about 15 kilometres, or just on the initial report said 15 kilometres from the perimeter fence, but it looks closer than that, Mark White, from what we can see.
Yeah, I mean, it's going pretty fast, so it could certainly do a few kilometres outside the perimeter fence.
Is this tragic dimension, Raul, that the plane appears to have hit a hostel that housed medics, either training at the nearby hospital or working at the nearby hospital. And, of course, it came down at about 1:15 in the afternoon local time. And the images, which are so extraordinary, show the canteen with the wall blown out at the end of the building, but plates and cups and knives and forks and spoons still sitting on the tables because the pupils, the medics, would have been there eating lunch. It looks like perhaps the casualties in that area may not have been as big as we might have feared. But, of course, it's really important to understand that the implications of this and the casualties involved are going to be enormous, are they not?
Yeah, absolutely, because since the aircraft, I mean, in terms of some of the images that we saw on X and television, it just seemed as if the aircraft just took off and just sort of, just came down and crashed. So the time of takeoff and crashing seems very, very, very quick. But I just hope and wish that the casualties on ground are not that enormous as we are fearing. But I think I'm fingers crossed that I just hope that I have not seen any fresh images at the moment, but just prayers for everybody on the ground, because there's already so much of loss of personal life that has happened. So just prayers out that there should not be more casualties on the ground. But I think it's an uphill task for the state administration, for everybody who's going to be involved now, engaged in the rescue operations, because it's a mammoth task now of securing the safety of everybody on the ground.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is very important. And like you said, setting up communication lines, because in times like these, I think the communication is very, very important. Imagine all the relatives waiting at Gatwick Airport and the other airport and London Airport. I just can't imagine their plight, where, what they must be thinking. They must be, and the ones who would have dropped their loved ones to the airport, and not even reached home probably. And oh my God, and to to probably hear and to listen to this kind of a news. Unimaginable. I mean, this tragedy is too enormous. It's shocking.
All right, Rao, thank you so much for joining us. That's Rao Mitra, former journalist for the Times of India, which, of course, is in the thick of the story. Mark White's still with us. The Foreign Secretary said something now, David Miliband. What's he saying?
The Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has said... He said that
15 years out of date.
It's an absolute tragedy, devastating news, and he is liaising now with governmental counterparts in India to try to establish exactly what has happened here and what the British government can do to assist. We've just had a statement as well, brief words from the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. He said he is stunned and saddened. I mean, you only ever get short bites like this, and it's always the same.
They don't know yet.
Exactly. There's not an awful lot they can say except
they have to say something.
Express absolute shock.
24 media hour to meet your age.
I mean, this will be obviously from the aircraft manufacturer's point of view as well. We should say a very significant blow, because this is Boeing, the aircraft manufacturer, which has had many problems across other fleets, but the Dreamliner fleet is a fleet of aircraft that has a very good safety record. It was launched some 14 years ago, and in fact, just in recent weeks, Boeing was lauding the fact that Dreamliner had carried its 1 billionth passenger. They've got some 1,200 of these aircraft, Dreamliner aircraft, all around in airlines all around the world, and the Dreamliner has never been involved in a catastrophic crash like this before. So clearly, I mean, absolutely horrific for Boeing as well as for the families caught up in this, because this is a company that has seen many disasters affecting other aircraft types within its fleet, and Dreamliners, until now, they had been, they had a very enviable safety record.
That's Mark White. If you're just tuning in now, we're going to share with you, it's a distressing scene, the point of impact of this 787 Dreamliner, really within seconds of takeoff at this airport. It appears to dip, and then we see a huge ball of flames. And we now know it collided with a hostel, which was for doctors and trainee doctors who almost certainly work at the hospital where the casualties will be treated.
Other people who have been posting messages about Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform MP, has just tweeted terrible news of the Air India flight that has crashed, and our thoughts and prayers are with all those involved.
Mark White, on the ground, of course, it's because of the sheer volume of fuel on that plane. The chaos on the ground is a huge part of this story.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can just see those images. They are a scene of absolute devastation there. It's just, this aircraft has obliterated whatever it's come into contact with in the aircraft itself. Judging by those images, if those are aircraft seats that I'm looking at there, I mean, it's almost unrecognisable. Well, it is unrecognisable. It's just mangled, smouldering wreckage. And there are parts of this, of course, that are still ablaze because, as you mentioned, there are many thousands of tonnes of aviation fuel on board this Dreamliner, because it was making its way on a long-haul flight to London's Gatwick Airport, due to land around 6:30 this evening. And there will be many loved ones who were waiting for their family members to come off that aircraft, now having to contend with the news that they've been caught up in this horrific tragedy, and just clearly hoping against hope that there may be some survivors from this. That kind of word has not come out as yet from the Indian authorities.
We're going to show you some images now from inside. Here we go. This is the hostel that I was just mentioning earlier. That was lunchtime, so that would have been probably packed with students, medics, clinicians, and you can see the impact of the airplane on the far wall of the room.
It's gone.
But in actual fact, there are extraordinary, I don't know whether you can see it on your screens, but there are bowls and cups just still sat on the tables where these young people, presumably majority of them will have been young people, were just sat having their lunch as they ordinarily would do in the shadow of the airport, to experience such an extraordinary tragedy. I was thinking, as we were just talking this morning, obviously we've been covering this for the last couple of hours, the Lockerbie incident that happened in the UK when there's a very powerful documentary online.
Yeah.
And what really struck me, and there are similar images emerging on social media at the moment, is the detritus of a tragedy such as a mangled aeroplane beside the everyday items that people were carrying with them. There were sunglasses on the lawn there in Lockerbie. There was a children's teddy bear. Like that I think is always moving on days like this. It's that juxtaposition of the mundane, Mark, with the tragic and extraordinary. And we will be seeing a lot of that this morning as people come to terms, particularly in India, with this extraordinary event.
Yeah, a lot of similarities, Bev, in terms of the destruction. With Lockerbie, it was my first job. I was a boy reporter for BBC Radio, and I was based in my hometown, a neighbouring town in the Scottish borders, you know, I was sent over to Lockerbie, my first staff job for the BBC. And yeah, I mean, it was horrific, that event. Remember seeing Sherwood Crescent, where the fuel-laden wings of this Boeing 747 crashed into that neighbourhood just by the main M74 motorway, and it created a huge crater in the ground, destroyed multiple houses.
Death just fell out of the sky, I remember someone saying.
Yeah, another area, Rosebank Crescent. And up there in Rosebank Crescent, there were parts of the sort of main passenger cabin came down. Many passengers still strapped to their seats on the roofs of houses, and just absolutely horrific.
And no survivors.
And no survivors at all from that aircraft. There was one, because I was based in Lockerbie for a year after the disaster, and then went back to do the subsequent fatal accident inquiry. There was one member of the cabin crew who was near the aircraft cockpit, which sheared away from the rest of the aircraft. And you remember those iconic images now of that aircraft cockpit lying in a farmer's field near Lockerbie. The flight deck of the aircraft, and she was there, and she landed in this field as well. And because it was kind of wet and boggy, they had established that had emergency services been able to reach her in a timely manner, there was a potential she might have survived that, but she was very, very badly injured as well. And of course, the emergency services were never going to get to that scene, because that was in a field miles from Lockerbie, and the main issue that they were dealing with was the town itself impacted by huge parts of this aircraft, and not just, of course, the fuel-laden wings in Sherwood Crescent, or the galley of the aircraft with the passenger part of that aircraft impacting areas around Rosebank Crescent in the town. But as Bev was mentioning, all over the town, the pavements were just covered with debris, detritus from the aircraft itself. Aircraft engines there and still turning on the ground as well. I mean, just the most incredible scenes.
That was a bomb.
Yeah, and that was a bomb, and it exploded at altitude. They didn't know for a while until they found the evidence of, you know, pitting from explosives and the sort of parts of the aircraft fuselage that showed outward signs of an explosion, that was what it was. They just didn't know to begin with. But that was an aircraft at high altitude that disintegrated at high altitude, and the various parts landed in the town. This is different. This is an aircraft, as we can see from the images, which was intact coming down with no signs of any explosion or fire. We couldn't see any kind of smoke debris from that aircraft at all as it was coming down in that neighbourhood near the airport.
Thank you, Mark. Let's talk now to aviation analyst Alex Macares. Alex, good morning. You host the On Air podcast bringing global aviation news to the world. Alex, you often talk about good news stories in the world of aviation, developments, interesting business angles, but obviously this is an extremely, thankfully, rare occurrence. Your observations this morning, Alex, on what we're seeing?
Good morning. Something quite unprecedented, and I say that because we do benefit globally from the safest form of transport being air travel. It is categorically safer than being in an elevator, and so with that, it's incredibly distressing to have seen all of this unfold in Western India this morning. It's involving an airline with a good safety record, Air India, but it's involving an aircraft with an impeccable safety record, the 787 Dreamliner. And just to put this into context for you guys, there are over 1,100 787 Dreamliners in service everywhere. It's been in service as an aircraft for over 15 years. And with that, there has never been a fatality or a whole loss associated with the 787 Dreamliner. It's never been involved in a fatal accident. We've never lost one globally. And it is the latest generation long-haul aircraft from Boeing. So it's incredibly concerning that, I mean, the footage that we've seen this aircraft struggling to gain altitude at a critical phase of the flight shortly after takeoff, with that search and rescue operation underway right now, understandably so, prioritizing human lives, or the hope at least for survivors.
Alex, frankly, the scenes we can see, the devastation caused by the impact of the plane in the local town, the local community, it's frankly, if you're looking now, if you're listening on the radio, it's like a war zone. Devastation. Yeah. There can't be survivors from that plane crash.
I mean, the footage is disturbing, as you say, and what also adds to the distressing nature of the way that this is unfolded is that you've got a long-haul aircraft and there is still no word on the status of survivors. So we wait for the official word, of course, but you've got this long-haul aircraft packed with over 240 on board coming down in such a densely populated part of an already densely populated city. And this should have been a routine 9-hour flight from the city to London Gatwick. It operates almost daily. And as I say, the 787 has an impeccable safety record. So while this search and rescue operation is underway currently, the US is preparing to dispatch a team, as is routine, from Boeing, because Boeing will play a big role in assisting in this initial part of the investigation, if only to rule things out. Because as I say, this aircraft is in service everywhere. It carries over 400,000 passengers per day.
For joining us this morning, Alex Macares there, aviation analyst.
Mark, what you've got some more news here.
Yeah, just been hearing from Noah Cohen, who is the girlfriend of our very own Charlie Peters. She's very sad today. She was on that very same flight 171, from Ahmedabad to Gatwick Airport in March. Flight 171, because she was on it, she said, because her flight to Heathrow had been cancelled, so she was diverted onto this flight. But she said both the 787 on board that aircraft and at the airport she described as shambolic, a very old airplane. And although it's not an old plane in the sense that the fleet's only 14 years old, so quite new, really, in sort of aviation terms. But she said maintenance of the aircraft, from what she could see, just wasn't up to spec. She said the plane looked old and looked creaky, and I won't use the other word she said.
So just be clear. So Charlie Peters, GBNews' reporter.
Yeah.
This is his partner.
Yes, indeed, Noah Cohen.
No. This is her on a plane.
She was on this exact same flight, Dreamliner flight 171, Air India 171, the exact same route from Ahmedabad to Gatwick Airport. She'd been diverted onto that flight in March because her other Air India flight was cancelled, and they put her on this. But she said at the airport it was shambolic. On the aircraft, she said it was equally shambolic and also, you know, just grubby, dirty, and didn't look to be well maintained from what she could see, you know, with her sort of untrained eye. She's vowed never to fly with them again, but clearly very sad today at the loss of life and, you know, reflecting of what could have been. Of course you do. If you were on an aircraft as well that you know has been involved then in a tragedy just a couple of months later, absolutely awful. But that will, you know, it will factor in. Of course, the aircraft investigators will look at the aircraft type, will look at how well it's been maintained in India. Well, the aircraft has, the aircraft type has a good and, you know, enviable safety record. Unlike quite a number of other Boeing fleets which have suffered their share of tragedies over the years, there has never been a major fatal crash involving a Dreamliner like this. But one of the things they'll be looking at, of course, as they do as always, the aircraft manufacturers will want to know that the airline and the ground maintainers at the airport, who can be separate from an airline, they can, you know, of course, contract out some of the ground maintenance work on aircraft as well. So they want to know that that is as good as it should be, and that didn't play any kind of part here, because frankly we don't know at this stage. We just know that something catastrophic happened to the point where there was not enough power for this aircraft to maintain height, and it descended very rapidly towards the ground. So does that look like engine failure? Well, perhaps.
Yeah, and of course the devastating part of it, 9 hours, having just taken off.
Yeah.
He had 9 hours of fuel for a 9-hour flight, and there'd have been reserve on top of that too.
Yes, just a little bit more from Noah. She said the airport was essentially a building site, unfinished terminal. Plane felt like it was creaky and not well maintained, is her description there. She's not a nervous flyer, she says, but didn't feel confident on that flight.
Well, more will emerge. If you're just to update you, 53 Britons on board. I think 242 casualties on board, Mark, altogether. 242
people in total. 12 of those were crew, 2 pilots, the captain, very experienced, 8,200 flying hours. Off the 200 and off the passengers on board, 169 of those were Indian nationals, 53 of those were British nationals, 1 Canadian and 7 Portuguese passengers on board as well.
11 children.
11 of the passengers were children.
Interestingly, just 5 minutes ago, the Hindustan Times, who've been bringing everybody up to date in India, they're reporting 120 feared dead, which is interesting because that's half the passenger list. Perhaps that's confirmations of dead. I don't know where they would have got that figure from. At least 120 people have been killed after the horrific Air India plane crash on Thursday, says the Hindustan Times. A London-bound Air India flight carrying 242 passengers crashed 5 minutes after takeoff near the Ahmedabad airport.
Well, we don't know, but I
don't know.
We would only be sort of guessing, but you know, clearly families are going to cling on to any potential sort of hope. So I don't think we should necessarily go there and give them false hope. But it may well be, as you said, Bev, that these are casualties that they've been able to confirm at this stage. Although it does seem very early on in a disaster like this to be giving figures like that out.
Yeah, it's early days, isn't it? I've been to India many times, Bev. Have you been to India?
No, I've never been to India.
Yeah, I've been to a lot, and I haven't been for some years. Part of the joy of India, of course, is the chaos. Actually, it really is.
Yeah,
it's the chaos in the towns, in the cities.
It's an assault on the senses.
It really is.
And you either love it or hate it.
I loved it.
Many people hate it. But many people absolutely love it.
Indian people, it's so friendly, so charming, so wonderful.
Yeah.
OK, well, thank you for staying with us this morning. Obviously, the news agenda was completely torn up because we had to bring you this global story, of course, this morning, but also very relevant to a British audience, as there has been confirmation of 53 British passengers on.
And we have a large Indian population, and the Gujarat community in this country is 650,000, and these people were flying from Gujarati. Right. And
a morning like this, of course, raises more questions than we are currently able to answer. That is a really important point to make at the moment. Obviously, very distressing scenes, and you know, Tom and Emily will be picking up from us this afternoon, and we'll hopefully attempt to answer some of the questions which are hanging in the air as we hand over to Emily and Tom.
And our condolences to all people who are affected by this terrible, terrible tragedy. That's it from us. We're handing over to Tom and Emily.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Thursday, the 12th of June. I'm Emily Carver. As you've been hearing, major breaking news this afternoon. An Air India flight bound for London, carrying 242 passengers, including 53 Brits, has crashed shortly after takeoff in India. Let's go straight to Tom, who has the latest for us.
That's right, Emily. Here's what we know so far. Flight Air India 171, which, of course, was flying to the United Kingdom. It was on a Boeing 7878 Dreamliner. It was due to fly from Ahmedabad to London Gatwick. Well, the flight crashed 5 minutes after takeoff at 1:38 local time. That's 9 in the morning British time. This was the first crash of a Boeing 787 Dreamliner since its introduction in 2011. Up to now, it has been, it's had an impeccable safety record. It's flown by many airlines in the United Kingdom, including British Airways, Virgin Atlantic and TUI Airways as well. Well, the flight crew made a Mayday call to air traffic control shortly after taking off, losing contact at just 625 feet. On board, there were 242 souls, 230 passengers, 2 pilots, 10 cabin crew, 168 of them Indian, 53 British, 1 Canadian and 7 Portuguese. Now, what we do know is that this airliner crashed into a residential area, causing a massive explosion and fire due to the heavy fuel load. Of course, it had only just taken off and had that full tank of fuel. There's the strong possibility of further ground casualties of those who happened to be on the site where the plane crashed. Well, let's turn now to our Home and Security editor, Mark White.
Well, you're looking at images there of thick plumes of black smoke that are rising over this residential neighbourhood just outside the perimeter of this main airport in